if you're struggling with hitting your chip shots fat, then I've got 5 things here that can hopefully help you improve the quality of your strike, and you won't be hitting them as fat so often. So the first thing I would say, and this is going to lead into a couple of the other things, is just to understand a little bit about your wedge here. So if you look at the wedge here, as you come down the club face, there's this pointy part that leads to the under part of the club face. It's kind of a sharp, pointy angle here. That's called the leading edge. And underneath, there's this curvy part here called the bounce. And those two are important things with what I'm going to be talking about here, because the leading edge is often called the digger and the bounce is called the skipper. And why that is that if you have a lot of shaft lean in particular, it kind of exposes this leading edge, presents the leading edge a little bit more to the ground. So if you are a little bit off with your ball striking and you catch it a little bit fat, the club is going to grab in that ground and dig in there. That's why it's called the digger, and give you some problems. But if you've got the club a little bit more vertical like this, then you've got a little bit of protection with the bounce here. So if you do catch it a little bit fat, the bounce of the club is going to literally kind of keep the club from grabbing into the ground. And you can get away with hitting it a little bit fat when you're using the bounce more. So with that understanding, the first thing I would say is with your chips to just watch the amount of shaft lean that you have. You can have a little bit, but be careful about having too much. I remember I was playing some golf with a guy in New York once, and he just kept hitting his chip shots fat and fat and fat, and he's getting really frustrated and really, he was just getting really down on himself about it. And so he asked me for my help after the round on the last green, and so we just went off to the side there, and I'm like, well, geez, you got your shaft, you're playing a lob wedge, but you're putting so much, I mean, it wasn't this much shaft lean, but his shaft lean was so far forward that if he just barely missed the strike, that club was just digging in the ground. So that's the first thing. Watch too much shaft lean. It's going to expose that leading edge to the ground, and it's going to make your chip shots a little less forgiving with your striking. So watch the shaft lean. Second thing is to stand tall. All of our swings have a natural down part of the swing, a natural flat part, and then a natural upswing. So you don't need to try and hit down. You don't need to try and hit up. Just by swinging, there's going to be that arc to it, and that's primarily dictated by the C7 vertebrae in your neck here, where your shoulder, where your neck and spine and your shoulders intersect here, and wherever that is it's kind of going to dictate where the bottom of what you can reach is. So if you keep your stand pretty tall, not stand perfectly straight up and down like this, but just stand up a little bit, and then keep the potential bottom of your swing arc up high enough so that as long as you stay up, you can't hit it fat. So that would be the second thing I would say, is just to stand tall enough so that you can't hit it fat. And then the third thing I would say is to use a wedge with lots of bounce. Remember, I said here that the bounce can help you give you a little bit more forgiveness, I guess, as far as where you strike it. So if you have a wedge or a club with a lot of bounce, you can actually hit it a little bit fat, and the club won't lose steam, and it'll still get through the ball, and your distance control will still be okay. So with your wedges, with your Sterling Irons wedges in particular, the sand wedge, and it's going to be like that with most other clubs as well, most other wedges. The sand wedge is the one that we designed that has the most amount of bounce. So this guy that I was talking about in New York in particular, he was using a lob wedge with very, very little bounce. So not only was he leaning the shaft forward, even if he had the shaft a little bit more vertical like this as he was coming through, he still had very, very little bounce on it. So we just had him switch to keep his shaft more vertical. We had him switch to the sand wedge, which gave him a little bit less loft and hit the same trajectory to the shots that he wanted. But then he was using the bounce for one to his advantage, and he was using a club with more bounce. So then all of a sudden he started really striking these shots really crisply. But there were a couple other things that he was doing as well, that he was kind of doing all of these things wrong. I don't want to say wrong, but like they were contributing to his fat shots. The next thing I would say is to don't hit down, don't try and take a divot. Try and sweep or collect or pick the ball. Most of the top chippers these days, Steve Stricker, for example, Zach Johnson, they don't take a lot of divot, and this is starting to become more well known even at the top professional ranks with the teachers and the players. So if you watch some videos on YouTube of some guys chipping around the green from tight lies, they're just kind of brushing the ground. They're not really hitting down on it and digging into the ground and taking a divot. So that would be another thing. If you're sweeping, collecting, picking the ball, it gives you a little bit more forgiveness, I guess. The likelihood of you hitting it fat is a little bit less than if you're trying to hit down and take a divot. So that would be the fourth thing. So we switched my guy that I was talking about to that, and that helped him as well. And then the last thing he was doing, which I also see a lot of, was his ball position was a little bit far back in the stance. So normally, if say you have it in the center here, the club might be like this. But if this ball is more back in the stance, all of a sudden this club is de-lofting like this. And remember, when the more the shaft leans forward, the more this leading edge can grab in the ground. So he wasn't really helping himself either by having a ball position in the back of his stance. So we moved the ball position a little bit more towards the middle, so that it was kind of positioned that when the club was just about down or just bottoming out, that's where the ball was, or that's where we put the ball. And that really helped his chipping as well. So that's all I want to say about that. Just to recap real quick here, watch the amount of shaft lean, have the shaft be a little bit more vertical or just slightly forward. Stand tall to keep the bottom of your swing arc up so that you can't hit it fat as long as you stay up. Use the wedge with the most amount of bounce. With the Sterling irons, it's going to be your sand wedge, and with most other wedges, it's probably also going to be the sand wedge. Not always, but most often the sand wedge. And then technically just try and sweep or pick or collect it. It's going to be a little bit more forgiving type motion than hitting down and trying to take a divot. And then also just to watch your ball position. I would say maybe have it be center-ish. There's no necessarily right ball position. But just make sure that your ball position is kind of where the club is coming down and just about all the way down or just kind of bottoming out. And that's generally going to be a pretty good position for you to put the ball to keep you from hitting the fat. So put those 5 things into play, give them a try, put them to work for you, and hopefully that's going to improve your ball striking and keep you from hitting these digging graves around the green and making bogeys and double bogeys and hitting all these shots fat. So put them into play, give them a try, and hopefully that'll help you out a lot.